Jake Turner, 33, lived in a small apartment above his garage in a quiet Kansas town. Life had been hard for years, ever since his father's shop went bankrupt and he'd inherited the building with barely any tools to keep it running. The bills were relentless and the work was inconsistent. Some weeks he saw 2 or 3 customers. Other weeks he barely earned enough for groceries. Still, Jake kept the garage open, fixing what he could for whoever walked through his door. On that rainy afternoon, he was tightening bolts on an old pickup when a sleek black SUV appeared. The SUV's polished finish and tinted windows looked wildly out of place against the rust-streaked walls of Jake's shop. As the wipers slowed, the driver's door opened. Out stepped Olivia Grant, 38, and wearing a tailored coat and diamond studs that glittered under the grey sky. Her hair was pulled back neatly, but her face showed exhaustion. From the passenger side, a small hand emerged, belonging to an 8-year-old girl in a wheelchair. Olivia pushed her forward gently. "Are you Jake Turner?" she asked, her voice carrying both urgency and hope. Jake nodded, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. Olivia explained quickly. Her daughter, Emily, had been in a wheelchair since she was 5, following a medical condition that weakened her legs. She had seen specialists all over the country, but now her custom mobility device had broken. They were passing through town when the chair's wheel locked up completely. A dealership in the city told her it was beyond repair and would take weeks to replace. Desperation had brought her to this tiny garage. Jake crouched beside Emily's wheelchair, studying its frame and complex mechanisms. It wasn't like any standard model he'd seen. It had advanced components designed for speed and flexibility. "I can take a look," he said carefully. "I'm not a medical tech, but I know machines." Emily's big brown eyes watched him quietly, curiosity flickering beneath her shyness. Olivia bit her lip, clearly unsure whether a small-town mechanic could fix something specialists had given up on. But she nodded, pulling a blanket tighter around Emily's shoulders. Jake wheeled the chair inside and rolled it onto his workbench. He examined the jammed wheel assembly, noting that a cracked bearing housing had caused the wheel to seize entirely. The wiring for the chair's electronic assist system was frayed from months of wear. "This is delicate," he muttered, more to himself than to them, "but it's not impossible." Olivia hovered near the door, glancing between Jake's grease-stained hands and her daughter. Emily, meanwhile, kept sneaking looks at the wall of old racing posters hanging in the corner. The rain tapped steadily against the tin roof as Jake disassembled the wheel assembly with slow precision. He didn't have the proper replacement parts. This was high-end European engineering, but he rummaged through drawers and found components from an old racing go-kart axle that could be adapted. Using a small lathe, he shaved the parts down to fit perfectly. Olivia stayed silent, as if afraid. Speaking might break his concentration. Emily finally whispered, "Do you fix race cars too?" Jake smiled faintly. "Not anymore. But I used to." An hour passed, then another. Jake's hands moved with steady confidence, improvising solutions where necessary. He rewired the motor assist system using high-grade copper from an old alternator and replaced the faulty connector with one he custom machined. For the cracked housing, he built a reinforced bracket from aircraft-grade aluminum scraps, making the wheel even sturdier than before. When he finished reassembly, he gave the chair a cautious test roll across the shop floor. It moved smoothly, no grinding or resistance. Emily's eyes widened. "It's better than before," she whispered. Olivia stepped forward, almost in disbelief. "It's moving." Jake nodded, but his mind was already running through more possibilities. "I can make it faster, smoother. Give her better turning radius. This thing can do more than it's been doing." Olivia hesitated. "Is that safe?" Jake glanced at Emily. "I'll make it safe. Safer than it's ever been." He adjusted the suspension, tuned the motor controller, and replaced worn bearings on both sides. By the time he was done, the chair responded so effortlessly to Emily's touch that it almost felt like an extension of her own body. When Jake finally stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead, Emily gripped the wheels experimentally. She spun in place, giggling at how smoothly it turned. "It's like flying," she said. Olivia's hand covered her mouth, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. Jake shrugged. "Just doing my job." But inside he felt something stir. This wasn't just a repair. This was giving a little girl freedom she hadn't felt in a long time. For someone barely keeping his own life together, it was a strange and welcome feeling. As Olivia pulled out her checkbook, Jake shook his head. "You already paid me," he said, nodding toward Emily, who was still testing her new mobility. Olivia frowned. "At least let me cover your time." Jake refused again, knowing she could afford it, but feeling it wasn't about money. "I've been where you are," he said quietly, needing someone to help, not knowing if they will. Olivia studied him for a long moment, as though memorizing his face. Finally, she tucked her checkbook away and simply said, "Thank you, Jake Turner." The rain had stopped by the time Olivia and Emily left. Jake stood in the doorway, watching the SUV disappear down the road. The garage felt quieter than usual, though the hum of tools still filled the air. Something about this encounter lingered in his mind. He'd fixed cars for farmers, tractors for neighbors, even an old motorcycle for a school kid. But this was different. This was someone's life changed in a few hours. He didn't know if he'd ever see them again. But he hoped Emily would keep that smile for a long time. That night, Jake sat on his worn couch, staring at the ceiling. The day had left him exhausted, but not in a bad way. He thought about the way Emily had laughed when the chair spun without resistance, the way Olivia's eyes had softened when she saw her daughter move so freely. It had been a long time since Jake had felt proud of himself for something other than paying the bills on time. Somewhere deep down, he knew this day wasn't over, not in the way that mattered. Something about it felt unfinished. Over the next few days, Jake returned to his routine, changing oil, fixing brakes, tuning engines. But every time he glanced at the empty corner where Emily's chair had been, he felt that strange spark again. He didn't talk about it with anyone. His friends wouldn't understand. They'd think it was just another repair job. But Jake knew it was more than that. He'd seen too many people give up when things got hard. Olivia hadn't given up on her daughter, and he hadn't given up on that chair. That kind of determination was rare. On the third day after they left, Jake noticed the shop phone blinking with a missed message. He almost ignored it. Most calls were spam, but something made him press play. A woman's voice came through, warm and confident. "Mr. Turner, this is Olivia Grant. I believe you might remember me and my daughter, Emily. I'd like to speak with you when you have a moment." Jake sat frozen, the sound of her voice sending a ripple of curiosity through him. Whatever this was, he knew it wasn't just about the wheelchair anymore. Jake replayed the message once more, his heart beating faster than he expected. There was something in Olivia's tone, measured, deliberate, and yet inviting. He didn't know why, but he sensed this was the beginning of something far bigger than a repair job. He looked around his small, cluttered shop, wondering if his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. He reached for the phone, staring at the number on the caller ID. For a man used to solving mechanical problems, this felt like the start of something much more human. When Jake wheeled Emily out from the workbench area, the garage seemed unusually quiet. The hum of the rain on the tin roof became the only sound as Olivia stepped closer, her hands trembling. Jake crouched in front of Emily, speaking softly, encouraging her to trust her legs. Emily hesitated, gripping the armrests for a moment before placing one foot on the concrete floor. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a visible effort, she shifted her weight forward and took a wobbly first step. toward her mother, eyes wide with both fear and wonder. Olivia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, tears welling instantly. She dropped her designer handbag without a thought, moving forward but stopping herself, afraid to disrupt the moment. Emily's second step was steadier, her small sneakers squeaking faintly against the concrete. Then a third and a fourth. By the time she reached her mother's arms, the dam broke. Olivia fell to her knees right there on the garage floor, clutching her daughter as tears poured down her face. The smell of oil and rain mixed with the overwhelming feeling of miracle in the air. Emily was laughing now, her arms tight around her mother's neck, not fully grasping the magnitude of what had just happened. Olivia, however, was overcome, rocking her daughter gently as she whispered, "You did it, baby. You really did it." She looked up at Jake with eyes that carried more gratitude than words could ever hold. For a moment, Jake simply nodded, feeling strangely humbled, as though he had been allowed to witness something far greater than a simple mechanical repair. His rough hands instinctively rubbed against his jeans, unsure how to react. Jake didn't want to make a big deal of it. "It was your daughter," he said quietly. "She did the hard part." Olivia shook her head, standing slowly while still holding Emily close. "No," she said firmly, her voice breaking. "You gave her the chance." Her hair was damp from the rain, and there was a smudge of grease on her cashmere sleeve where she had touched the chair earlier, but she didn't seem to notice. All that mattered was the fact that Emily had just walked without assistance for the first time in years. Jake offered to run a few more checks on the chair to make sure everything was in perfect order. Olivia insisted on paying him, pulling out her sleek wallet, but Jake raised a hand. "I didn't do this for money," he told her sincerely. "Just seeing her walk, that's more than enough." Olivia looked at him for a long moment, her expression shifting as though she were realizing something important. She finally tucked her wallet away, giving a faint smile. "Then I guess I owe you more than I can pay right now," she said softly. When Olivia and Emily finally left that afternoon, the rain had slowed to a mist. Jake stood in the doorway, watching the black SUV disappear down the road. The garage felt emptier now, but warmer, somehow. He went back to his workbench, cleaning tools he'd already cleaned twice, just to keep his hands busy. He didn't expect to hear from them again. After all, people came and went in his line of work, but something about that encounter lingered in his mind long after the day was over. 2 weeks later, Jake was tightening bolts on a customer's truck when a familiar vehicle pulled into the lot. He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag, and watched Olivia step out in a tailored coat, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. Emily followed, this time walking without assistance. Though she still moved carefully, Jake couldn't help the small smile that spread across his face. "Looks like someone's been practicing," he said, nodding toward Emily, who grinned shyly in return. Olivia's smile was softer, more deliberate, as though she'd been waiting for this moment. "I didn't just come to say thanks," Olivia began, standing in the middle of his garage. "I came with an offer." Jake raised an eyebrow, unsure what she meant. Olivia took a deep breath, explaining that she ran a foundation dedicated to helping children with mobility challenges. Until now, they had been forced to outsource all their repair and customization work, often with disappointing results. "We need someone who cares," she said simply. "Someone who won't just see a machine, but the life it supports. That's you." Jake was stunned into silence, his mind scrambling to catch up with her words. She went on to explain that she wanted him to become the lead technician for the program. The position came with a salary far beyond anything he had ever imagined, benefits that would finally give him stability and the chance to work directly with families like hers. "I don't care about fancy resumes," Olivia said, looking him directly in the eyes. "I care about character, what you did for Emily. That's the kind of person I want on my team." Jake shifted uncomfortably, the weight of the offer settling in. He thought about the years he had scraped by, working odd jobs to keep the lights on, often wondering if anything he did really mattered. And here was this woman, a billionaire who could hire anyone in the country, offering him a chance not just to earn a living, but to change lives. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, quietly. Olivia smiled. "Say yes," she replied, as if it were the most obvious answer in the world. Emily tugged gently. On Jake's sleeve. "Please," she asked in a small voice, and that was the final push he needed. Jake accepted, still half in disbelief, and Olivia's relief was visible. Over the next few days, she arranged everything. Paperwork, tools, even a relocation package that would move him closer to the Foundation's main facility. His first day, there felt surreal. Instead of a dimly lit garage, he walked into a brightly lit workshop filled with advanced equipment and walls covered in photos of smiling kids. Olivia introduced him to the staff, calling him the man who gave my daughter her first steps. The team welcomed him warmly, and Jake felt something inside him settle for the first time in years. Within weeks, Jake was customizing wheelchairs, walkers, and mobility devices for children across the state. Each project came with a story, and each story reminded him why he had taken the job. Some days were long and exhausting, but unlike before, every ounce of effort felt worth it. He found himself staying late to fine-tune adjustments or adding small, personal touches for the kids, like custom paint jobs or grips shaped for their hands. Olivia visited often, not as a distant CEO, but as someone deeply invested in the work and in Jake's success. 6 months later, Jake looked out across the Foundation's workshop, now humming with activity. His station was covered in sketches for a new all-terrain wheelchair design he'd been developing. Olivia stepped in quietly, watching him work for a moment before speaking. "You know," she said, "when I met you, you had no idea who I was. You just stopped to help. That's why you're here." Jake smiled faintly, setting down his wrench. "And I'm glad I did," he replied, "because this is the best job I've ever had." Emily, visiting after school, ran up to show him how fast she could walk now. For Jake, the memory of that rainy afternoon in his old garage never faded. It reminded him that sometimes the smallest choice to pull over, to take the time, to care, can set off a chain of events you could never predict. He had gone from barely scraping by to leading a program that changed lives every day. And while the paycheck and security mattered, it was the gratitude in the eyes of each child and parent that kept him going. In helping one little girl walk again, Jake had found a purpose that would carry him the rest of his life. Jake stood in the center of the brand-new workshop, the scent of fresh paint still lingering in the air. The space was large enough to house a dozen workstations, each equipped with specialized tools and technology far beyond anything he'd ever owned. Every corner gleamed with purpose. It was funded entirely by Olivia's foundation, but the heart of it belonged to Jake. He knew every bolt, every wrench, every blueprint. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was his calling. Months ago, he'd been a man, scraping by. Now, he was building hope for children who'd been told their mobility dreams were over. The first week they opened, a boy named Liam arrived with his father. His wheelchair had been damaged in an accident, leaving him unable to attend school. Jake knelt down, speaking to Liam at eye level, making him laugh before even touching the chair. In just 3 hours, he had it fixed and fitted with new features to make movement easier. When Liam rolled across the workshop without a hitch, his father's voice cracked with gratitude. That day, Jake realized the workshop wasn't just about machine, it was about restoring dignity, freedom, and a sense of belonging. Emily visited often, running straight into Jake's arms, as though they'd known each other for years. She loved helping him, handing him tools or sketching colorful designs for future mobility devices. Her laughter filled the workshop, reminding Jake why he had poured every ounce of energy into this place. Olivia sometimes stood quietly in the doorway, watching the two of them work together. She knew Emily's transformation was only possible because Jake had cared enough to stop his own day and help a stranger in need. That moment had rewritten both their lives. One afternoon, Olivia invited Jake to a community event hosted by her foundation. There were hundreds of attendees, parents, children, donors, and local officials. Jake wasn't used to crowds or public speaking, but Olivia insisted he be recognized. When she introduced him as the man who had given her daughter a second chance, the applause was deafening. He stood at the podium, humbled, and spoke about how small acts of kindness could change the course of a life. People listened not just politely, but with genuine admiration. The donations that poured in after that speech allowed the workshop to expand faster than Jake had imagined. Soon, he had a small team of dedicated technicians who shared his vision. Some were mechanics, others were engineers, and one was even a former mobility device user who wanted to give back. Together, they repaired and customized devices for children across the Midwest. Jake insisted every child leave the workshop not just with a fixed device, but with something personal, colors, decals, or small features that made them feel proud to use it. To him, these touches mattered as much as the repairs themselves. One cold winter morning, a mother arrived with her teenage daughter, Ava. The girl hadn't walked in nearly 4 years due to a spinal condition. Her braces were outdated and painful. Jake worked tirelessly for days, researching the latest designs, adapting materials, and testing prototypes. When Ava finally tried on the new braces, she took a cautious step forward, then another, and then burst into tears. Her mother covered her mouth, shaking as she watched her daughter walk again. Jake stood quietly nearby, letting the moment belong entirely to them. It was the kind of silent reward he lived for. By spring, word of Jake's workshop had spread far beyond their small Kansas town. Families drove in from neighboring states. Local news outlets ran stories about the mechanic with a heart of gold. Jake didn't care about fame, but he appreciated that the attention brought more resources to help more children. Olivia managed the business side, ensuring every dollar went toward the mission. Together, they made an unlikely but powerful team one, grounded in compassion, trust, and shared purpose. The work was demanding, but every smile, every step made it worth it. Emily's progress never stopped inspiring Jake. She had joined a youth soccer league, playing in a lightweight adaptive frame he'd designed just for her. Watching her run across the field under a blue Kansas sky brought tears to his eyes more than once. Olivia often sat beside him in the stands, occasionally brushing his arm in quiet gratitude. There was a bond between them that went beyond business, rooted in a day when both of their lives had been stuck and one act of kindness had set them in motion again. Late one evening after the workshop had closed, Jake stayed behind to work on a custom order. A young boy in Texas needed a specialized device that no manufacturer had been willing to attempt. Jake studied every detail, determined to make it perfect. As he tightened the final bolt, Olivia appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. She didn't speak at first, just watched him work. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "You know, Jake, this place was my dream for Emily, but you've turned it into a dream for every child who walks through those doors." The workshop had become more than a facility, it was a haven. Children came in nervous or shy, but left feeling confident and capable. Parents arrived burdened with worry, only to leave with renewed hope. Jake never took these transformations for granted. He knew how quickly life could take someone from stability to struggle, and how deeply it meant when someone reached out a hand. That truth had been carved into his heart the day Olivia pulled into his dusty garage. Back then, it was just a rainy afternoon. Now, it was the reason dozens of children could walk again. One summer afternoon, the foundation celebrated its 1-year anniversary. The event was held outdoors, with colorful tents, live music, and rows of children racing around on bikes, walkers, and wheelchairs Jake's team had restored. There was laughter everywhere. Olivia stepped onto the stage, holding a microphone, and called Jake up beside her. She told the crowd about the day they met, how he had no reason to help her, yet did anyway. She ended with, "I thought he fixed my daughter's wheelchair, but what he really fixed was my faith in people." The standing ovation lasted minutes. When the applause faded, Jake spoke, not about himself, but about the future. He announced plans to open a second workshop in Missouri and a mobile repair unit to serve rural areas where families couldn't travel. The crowd erupted in cheers. For Jake, the expansion wasn't about building an empire. It was about making sure no child went without the chance to move, play, and live fully. As the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the celebration, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had gone from being overlooked to being a reason for change. That evening, after the crowd dispersed, Emily ran over and hugged him tightly. "Thank you for fixing my legs," she whispered, still calling it that, even though she knew it was more complicated. Olivia stood nearby, her eyes glistening. Jake looked at them both and realized something he hadn't just repaired machines or built a career. He had built a family of sorts, one bound by gratitude and purpose. Every child he helped was like a new branch on that family tree, and each branch carried the weight of the same truth: kindness changes everything. As the stars began to prick the sky, Jake locked up the workshop and took one last look at the rows of neatly organized tools. He thought back to the version of himself who had stood in a dim garage months ago, unsure how he'd pay the next bill. That man could never have imagined this life. He smiled, locked the door, and walked out into the warm Kansas night. In the distance, Emily's laughter echoed, carried on the summer air. And Jake knew that as long as he had the skills in his hands and the fire in his heart, the work would never truly be done.